All right, we are live. I'm so excited. Welcome, Ryan. How
Thank
are you
you.
doing today?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Good. It's 12 p.m. Eastern here in Toronto, lunchtime. Very energized. This is like the sweet spot for me. I'm not a morning person.
It's mid-afternoon here, so I got a little bit of a mid-afternoon slump, but I've got some sugar here, so that's good.
That's great. So, for all of you who are curious as to why I brought Ryan in, him and I actually know each other. So the short story, I'll try to keep it short because we want to dig in. We have a lot to cover. Is that 2019, I was laid off, just like a lot of people pre-pandemic. And I saw, Ryan post basically this generous offer of helping people, especially people who are unemployed, with some training um, around intrinsic motivators and that type of thing. It instantly attracted me. Honestly, I didn't know what it was, but I was just attracted by the idea of understanding my motivators because at the time I was burnt out, I wasn't happy with my career, and I was looking for answers. So, did the training, it was incredible. And I actually used some of these tools during my journey as a career coach, helping people identify their sweet spot and understand who they are so that they can decide what role they want to do. And I brought Ryan into my podcast because I was curious about his journey and his story. He shared with me amazing things, and little did I know he was the first person actually who comes on my YouTube channel. And little did I know that I enjoy it. And what I enjoy the most about it is helping people uncover their story. Because sometimes what happens is we get so hung up on our titles, on the boxes that we fit in, on trying to define who we are based on the roles that society defines. And it kind of makes it very confusing for us to express our value because we may not fit in that box. And story, in my true, I'm not going to say opinion, true belief that I tested over many, many people that I help professionally and founders, is the best way to truly articulate our value. So here we are. Ryan volunteered to be my guinea pig because he wanted help with articulating his brand. So why don't you tell us, Ryan, a little bit about what do you feel is your biggest struggle right now when it comes to your brand?
Thank you. So I guess it also depends on which brand we're talking about because there's two, or maybe three if we talk about me being a separate brand. Maybe, maybe therein
We're
lies some.
going meta right now, everyone.
Yeah, yeah. So there's like two businesses you could say,
Yeah.
and actually, yeah, it is, to simplify it is two rather than three probably because there's the one of them is more sort of me and my consulting, and the other one's more product. Um, and I guess the challenge is, we briefly touched on this before, is time, and where to use that time as best as possible. So I love creating things and delivering things, and I've really sucked at you know communicating what I do, and um, kind of even clearly defining what I do. Um, so a lot of, as you referred to, a lot of it has been training, and then there's coaching and consulting, um, and then there's this product. So I think maybe the product is slightly easier, and then I say slightly, and then communicating what I do is slightly harder. Yeah, so it's kind of, yeah, communicating what I do and the value I bring, and the channels to communicating that, because it feels to me like a minefield out there. So many different platforms and so many different content forms, and yeah, I feel like I'm stumbling around, and
I hear you.
like where to start. Yeah.
I hear you. When I did that live and I was talking about my framework in terms of why people struggle with articulating their value, sometimes we tend to feel like we need to be overly vulnerable on social media or across all of our marketing messages. And we come across, like just sharing fluff or a sob story, or we feel we need to lean into being like a textbook and write in a manner that can be like, I mean, it's good to provide evidence, type of knowledge, right, that leans on the science-based side of thing. But something that you shared with me actually a while back when you were on my podcast is it's important to balance the human side in what we share as experts and not just the technical side, right? So trying to find that, sweet spot sometimes as we position ourselves as service providers and experts can be challenging. We want people to take us seriously, but we also want them to get to know us at a personal level. How do we strike that balance? And how do we also do it in a way that is in integrity with our passion and who we are? Because sometimes we have this tendency to chase shiny objects. Sometimes the pressure of wanting to make money as an entrepreneur might make us choose a lane because it's just quicker, because it's faster to monetize it. But then we burn out and then we're miserable. And that can come through in our messaging. So when I shared that model, and I'm not saying, right now where you fit in, Ryan, but when I shared that model, that made you want to reach out to me. And I asked you, what your biggest frustration was. And I think you mentioned, yes, a lot of it was articulating, that you have multiple brands. You know that you offer a lot of value, but you get stuck at articulating what that value is in a clear way to your audience so that it translates through all of your marketing, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's, communicating with potential clients. And, when that happens, it can be a crippling feeling, right? Like you don't know where to start. You don't even know what to say anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So, how do you feel about us maybe digging into your story a little bit to help us, let's say, revisit why you even do what you do and maybe bring it into some of your marketing?
Yeah, let's give it a go.
Awesome. So, from what I remember from our conversation, you mentioned that how you started out in your career, and if we look at your LinkedIn profile as well, you started out as an engineer, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is
Yeah.
like your roots, the very, very beginning.
Yeah, of my work life. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And you shared with me that one of the pivotal moments was that you were frustrated as an engineer. I think there was a story about how you joined this engineering company that needed a website. And there was a sense of frustration. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Gosh, I mean, there were quite a few companies. I don't know if I remember the exact one.
Well,
Um,
maybe just, pick a company while you were an engineer where you felt just like that was the pivotal moment of you deciding that you don't want to just use that part of your brain anymore. And you realize the importance of blending in that psychology and business aspect.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess I was a software developer, and I just started to talk to customers, which is kind of um, a strange thing to do as a software developer. So, I think eventually that kind of got recognized, and so I ended up sort of working more in, it was a small company, so I guess it was some hybrid between a business analyst and an account manager and a project manager, and kind of all of that rolled into one.
Wow.
Um, so that's where it kind of began, because as you said, I was frustrated by kind of the disconnect um, between what I was doing and what the business was doing and what customers were wanting, and so I kind of naturally took to that kind of bridging role, and then that got into, well, me into coaching later on, so team coaching and team and organizational effectiveness. Yeah, that's the long and short of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, who here? I'm sure there are a lot of people here because I recognize. I mean, I see Will here, he's in UX, Matthew in product. And yes, you can. This is my cat. This is my cat, everyone. A lot of people here who are in tech and product, they're familiar, right, with what it's like to be frustrated because many people feel that just focusing on their role, whether it's a technical role, a design role, a product role, is not enough to move the needle. You have to deal with the people aspect. And oftentimes, the emotions and the misalignment is what makes it very hard to get things done. So, who actually in the same boat, Ravinder? Yes, yes. This is why I ended up quitting over text. But I should have probably met Ryan before that happens because he might have, been able to help me and talk me through it.
Yeah.
um,
I
was
mean, I
there?
think
Sorry,
the
go
other
ahead.
the other thing is knowing, I mean, I guess, I'm, preaching to the converted here, of course, but
Of course.
it's also knowing your strengths and um, who I was and what I really wanted, because I never really was a software developer at heart in the first place. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, that's just another big part of it to mention. Um, so it wasn't just that I noticed kind of a hole in the whole system. It was also that what I was doing wasn't really me.
What makes you say that? I'm so curious. I mean, why did you even get into it in the first place if you weren't a developer at heart?
Um, Probably just not knowing myself at all. When I left high school and then went into university and did an engineering degree, and I think I already knew then that it wasn't really for me. But then it was like, well, I've started, I may as well finish. So yeah, just young and not knowing better, or not knowing myself well enough. So yeah, so yeah, of course, part of this is my personal path. Of course, I don't want to sort of say that every software engineer has to be a people person to the
Yeah.
max, but I do think that more. I think that's what I offer to. Uh, I still work quite a lot with software development teams. Is bringing them more to helping them to communicate better, and both with themselves as a team, and also outside of their team, to stakeholders and customers and so on.
I
Yeah.
agree with you. I mean, not every developer needs to become a coach, whether it's agile coach or some kind of coach, or even has to become a people manager, move up. But it also doesn't mean that you completely neglect those skills because if you do, it's going to be hard for you to collaborate with others. But for you, it felt like your calling in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a step towards, yes. Mm.
Was there, I often find that people who get to where they are at and help people with a particular problem, it's because they've struggled with it themselves. Do you feel that you struggled with that at the beginning of your career to some extent while you were being a developer?
Yes, I think both two parts that I can think of. So one is uh, like personally struggling with it, and
Yeah.
the other being that due to my personality type and probably my history as well, I, being someone who connects people and creates kind of cohesion and harmony in teams and connecting the dots was always kind of part of who I am. So yeah, and those two are related as well. Yeah,
Do you
I
con-
totally agree with you that struggling with something is often the path to what you can offer others. You best give others what you struggle most with yourself. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Would you consider yourself an introvert?
yeah, definitely. Yeah, um, well spotted.
There are different types of introverts
Absolutely.
and degrees, right? A lot of people may not, I mean, people who know me very well know that I'm an introvert, but people who see me on LinkedIn for the first time think I'm an extrovert because I do these lives and it doesn't seem like I am nervous, but I am most of the time.
Mm.
Actually, right now I'm not because I know you and it just feels like an intimate conversation versus in front of like a huge audience, even though I know there's an audience, but I don't see your faces. An introvert's dream of hiding behind a computer and not talking to anyone. But yeah, I am an introvert too, so I understand, how you feel. And when you're an introvert, it can be tough. It can be tough because and you're often misunderstood, right? Because people think that just because you're an introvert, you don't enjoy getting to know people, but
Hmm.
that's not true.
Yeah.
You actually do enjoy, getting to know people, but you prefer knowing them at a deeper level versus knowing too many people at a shallow level. And yeah, we tend to love, connecting the dots. Amazing. Um, so you were an introvert, but you loved connecting the dots while you were a developer. Can you give us an example though? Like I'm still not seeing the struggle here. Can you give us an example of how you struggled um, as a developer, balancing the people side with the technical side?
Um, well, for me, the main struggle of being a developer was that uh, the technical, although I could do it, was not really my strength or my passion.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's where the frustration came from. But I could see that a lot of the challenges that others were facing were because they were good at the technical and or they were just focused fully on the technical and alignment and coordination across the team and across teams,
Mhm.
across departments and across the business was not happening. So that was part of my frustration, and so that's why I went off and studied again, did an MBA to understand organizations and how they fit together, and so I could kind of bring that the frustration that I was seeing in the teams and the organization that I was working with, so I could help them with that.
So you already were good at the technical side of things.
Good enough.
Yeah. But you felt that it was still a bit difficult for you to get people to align, get people to agree? Like what do you think, what was the MBA? What was the purpose of getting the MBA? What was the tangible skill that you were hoping that you would get from pursuing that MBA?
Visibility. So this is kind of, if I draw these different strands together, what comes up is why I created a brand called Systemic Agility, because ultimately value is created across a system. A system consists of individuals, teams, departments, different systems, processes, and customers, stakeholders, etc. So a part of me is really struggles with any siloed part of the system and working within that and seeing, because I can't unsee what I see, that actually bottlenecks are not are happening in places that people don't have, usually have no idea why they're happening, or they're too caught up in their own part of the business, or the organization, which is normal for humans to do. Everyone's a bit biased, and so I've kind of always been the person who kind of takes a level up and sees everything, and that's why I would get frustrated with working with just one part, even if I could make that part more effective or efficient. It didn't really satisfy me. So that's where the systemic part comes in. One of the challenges I have is it's fine to explain that to you, but in an organization where everyone is a little bit biased, they want what's interesting to them, not necessarily what's useful to the system as a whole. And that's one of the challenges with also communicating the value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. Because when you're explaining it to me, you almost explain it as an overall process. It's like the engineering part of you just kicks in and starts putting it into some kind of high level process. But what would help you is to speak to it from a scenario based, an event based, things that happened in your life way that would help people see that journey. You know what I mean? I'll give you an example. So if I came to you and said, Ryan, what I do or what I've been doing is I work with professionals and I help them uncover their hidden talents, and I help them translate that into messaging that aligns with the role that they're going after. You're just going to be like, okay, great. I don't know how that's going to help me. And there's so many people who do that. But if I shared with you the story and said, Ryan, the reason that I really love helping people tell stories and uncover their hidden talent is because when I was in the corporate world, I was so frustrated. I ended up quitting over text because I was doing a job. I was in the corporate world for 15 years doing jobs that I was good at, but not necessarily passionate about. And I just couldn't put my finger on what would bring me joy and what my zone of genius is. So I worked with a career coach, and what that did to me is it transformed me in many ways. It helped me identify and put my finger on what I'm actually great at that I haven't been able to articulate and I haven't been able to uncover. I realized that having someone from the outside ask me the right questions, revisit my story and connect the dots, is so transformational. And so this is why I started helping people with their career so that they can uncover their superpowers and translate it into possibilities for them. So when you hear that, you're more moved because I'm using my story to show you in more detail um, the exact thing that you're struggling with and the transformation in the end. And if you read my story, you'll also see, of course, I gave you a very abbreviated version. You'll also see of how I helped someone in Nigeria who had just landed, in Canada, was being lowballed a very low salary because recruiters could not understand, his true value. And when we worked together and he articulated it, he ended up landing a role that was 200,000 when he was being told the most he can do is 75,000. So when you hear something so specific like that, right, versus a high level arc that is summarized, that is when the organizations are going to truly understand your value. A lot of it is we feel pressured that we need to have some kind of high level elevator pitch, but sometimes even just sharing a very small, deep, focused story, like a case study, that ends up really helping people lean in and realize that what you're sharing is real and different.
Mm. Yeah, I'm not sure I've ever communicated it on a personal level like that. It's generally been what the value has been to the clients, yeah, on the just the value to them.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
If you share some of your story, and let's go with LinkedIn, although I don't just work with people on telling stories on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is just one channel and it's just one, tool that can help you broadcast your message. It could be on a podcast, it could be on a stage, it could be in a book. I work with authors, I work with um, getting people on podcasts to share their journey. There are many ways to basically communicate your brand. LinkedIn is just one of them. But let us just use LinkedIn for the purposes of using a concrete example because we all tend to learn better through examples. You don't have to share your entire story in one LinkedIn post. And if you just shared a small piece of your story and just shared pieces and pieces and pieces of your story, and people who follow you, someone who follows you, right? This is their customer journey. They'll see one post pop up. They are introduced to a part of your story that deeply connects with them. Let us say it's the part where you were a frustrated engineer and you got sick and tired of basically not getting, let's say, that alignment because the psychology was missing in it. People were just, trying to develop these sites without understanding the business, right? And then you felt that there was something, a gap for you that you had to develop, which is how do I understand the psychology of people better? How do I influence them? Let me go and get an MBA so that I can do that better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Guess what? Any organization with a leader who is an engineer or was an engineer are going to connect with you simply over the fact that you mentioned that you were an engineer. One of the clients who signed up with me, B2B, he was attracted to one post that made him follow me for a whole year until he decided to say to me up front, I want to work with you. I don't care what is it that you offer, but I want to work with you. And that was the beginning of the conversation that led to us finally deciding what we're going to work on, right? But the story that made him want to reach out to me was the story of how I was a management consultant. I was traveling. I was exhausted. I was stressed. And I did not feel fulfilled. And the story was so specific in the sense of I remember saying, I had packed my bags. I had to catch a 6 a.m. flight to Minnesota and leave everything behind. I had a dog, not this puppy, but another dog. I had to leave him the entire week, pack my bags, fly to Minnesota, take a 6 a.m. flight because I was promised an opportunity that would progress my career, where I would be the team lead of a $1 billion program. That's like career changing. So I decided to make the sacrifice. I show up and I'm being told by my leadership team that they don't want me to be the team lead. It was going to be someone else. So I felt devastated because I made all of that sacrifice for nothing. I just shared that story. I didn't really even, share the entirety of it or go deep into what I do, but just reading that story made that person identify because he went through the exact experience where he worked for the same management consulting company and felt undervalued as a leader. And so he started his own consultancy. So you see how sometimes we overthink it. I think, the logical, analytical side of our brain is like, no, 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 don't share that story. That's too simplistic. That's silly. People are not going to come to me because of that. But sometimes, that story might be the one that gets someone to follow you for a while, and they'll read other posts that will balance that out. They will read different pieces of your story and connect the dots.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm learning is, because I don't think I've ever actually shared like a story about myself and on social media. So like just doing that doesn't have to be the only form that I use, but doing
Yeah.
that time to time, and just not overthinking it, but bringing some true stories about my work life and so on from the past and into it. Then I don't know who's going to relate, but likely that for some people, each time I share a story, they will relate to it in some way. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, let's do a quick test from the audience. And I know there's a little bit of delay, so maybe the response is going to come like literally a minute later after I say this. But who magically found me through one of my LinkedIn posts? I mean, drop that in the chat to confirm. You came across one of my posts where I shared a story that really connected with you. And then you're like, oh my God, I want to follow her because I'm curious. And then at some point, after a whole bunch of posts, you became my client. Just drop it in the chat. Let's gather some data. Whether you became my client or a long-term follower, right? I think sometimes, yeah, like you said, we overthink it. It feels weird because you're like, I'm just posting this and I don't know who's going to see it. And sometimes, your ideal client, there you go, Ravinder, me, first confirmation. It feels weird. But think about it this way. When companies put out an ad, right? You see like ads in the subway, on the bus. Lots of brands do that. They don't know who's going to end up seeing it. There's an element of, how do I say this without being woo-woo? But there's an element of like spontaneity where one day someone walking by who needs that product sees it on a billboard, right? And the message on that billboard connects with them. So then that is the first time that the brand is activated in their brain. Now they're going to be more aware that whenever they see any marketing campaign messaging of that brand, they'll keep reading and reading, and eventually they'll become customers. So that's what happens on LinkedIn or any platform is someone out there. Someone out there. It's a numbers game. But it's not about, let me just post a whole bunch of things, because that is a waste of time. It's about, let me be genuine about some of my values, why I do what I do, share actual events, whether they happen through my coaching with clients, whether they happen through conversations with a friend. And I know that there is going to be someone out there who will benefit from it and who will connect with it and who will want to be curious and come to me eventually. And sometimes it can feel discouraging because people might not reach out to you right away, but it doesn't mean that they're not watching. And there you go. I liked one of your posts, and then you reached out to me. There you go. I've seen your posts and they've been very positive. I followed you ever since and came across this live session, decided to join. So there you go. We got the data, Ryan. So your engineering brain can feel convinced. But
Yeah.
even what you just shared with me, Ryan, about the challenge of even, balancing that right and left brain, and how sometimes, that can hold us back when we constantly want that evidence and proof. If you talk about it through a story, people are going to relate to it. I relate to it. Sometimes I overthink things. And sometimes I get in the way of doing these things where I'm like, I'm just going to share my story openly and put my message out there. And when I quiet down that analytical brain that says, where's the data? Where's the proof? This is not logical. When I quieten that down, that's when I get the results.
Yeah. No, that's a really good message for me.
Yeah. So, where are you in your hero journey? You mentioned that you did your MBA, right? And then you started training in professional coaching.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you shared as well with me a long time is that you realize that you don't enjoy forcing change on people and that it never works.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of been my way of working and my ethos right from
Mm-hmm.
the get-go is more, and I think we also, the workshop that I was running where we met was also around creating the environment and conditions for people to flourish and be the best they can be in their work situation and in for themselves and for their teams and their organizations. So it's kind of been how I naturally have always operated. So because you mentioned the subject of motivation, yeah. So I get so yeah. So I guess that's where the bringing together of the coaching and kind of organizational awareness comes in, and when, well, you mentioned change. Who's not going through change almost all the time? So we could even like remove the word change and
Yeah.
just say, yeah, how people work. Um, um, and I guess maybe one of the challenges for me is coming back to, communicating and articulating, is that's kind of like an overarching way of working. The Yeah, well, I mean, I guess coming back to your whole suggestion is, I don't necessarily need to know how that directly translates to um, yeah, the bottom line for the customer. For example, I could just tell, yeah, I could just tell that as a story, and then some
Exactly.
people will relate to it and some people won't.
Exactly. Like, if we even go to, and you don't have to mention any names, like call it a fictional character or whatever, but if you go to one of your engagements where you clearly noticed, whether it's one individual or multiple individuals who are not feeling motivated, right? And you most likely put together some kind of training program that was structured, that transformed their level of motivation. Is there an example of that that you can think of off the top of your head?
Well, actually, I mean, more than a training program, it's kind of coaching um, uh, teams and teams of teams. So yeah, I mean, there's kind of two parts to motivation. There's the internal and intrinsic motivation of the individuals, but then there's also the environment and the system and the conditions for people to not be demotivated. Which so the example that I'll give is more the latter. So I I suppose the way that people work, and this is
Mhm.
again the systemic word that I was using.
Yeah.
Um, if things can flow and the system can and work can flow more easily, then people are more motivated because there's less hassle, there's less in their way, there's more, there's better collaboration, there's better communication, there's uh, less conflict, and or when there is conflict, it's more creative, and then that can be resolved and worked with and turned into advantage and so on. So the example that I'm thinking of is in a product organization of about 150 people. So it's several teams, and then what I do with them is actually quite simple, which is to interview and talk to everyone, understand where the bottlenecks are. So a lot of it actually is diagnosing what's in the way, and if it's in the way, then it is the way. Because if we can understand what's in people's way, and that can be quite a lot of different things, from their manager to their systems and processes, to something that personal is going on for them, to the organizational structure, to whatever it might be. If we can just highlight those, and there's lots of different ways to do that, then what we say in the systemic world is problems are solutions. So as soon as you can actually really get to the heart of where the problem is, then the solutions just naturally present themselves. And then we can start with putting changes in place. So yeah, so that was a situation where
I love it.
every team was working in its own silo, and we got them to ultimately work together. And sometimes that involves kind of working with one or two of the teams, but usually it involves working with the whole system, so all of them plus the leadership.
So you are working with an organization, and you were coaching team of teams, basically across the board, 150 people, right?
Mhm.
What
Well, this part of the organization was 150, yeah. So it was actually a larger
part?
one.
Yeah. So you were coaching a part of an organization. The part was 150 people, and you can preface it with, this was $1 billion organization, whatever, so that people understand the size. You see, um, setting up the situation of this scenario is important, of your story is important.
Mm.
Because if you just say that I was at an organization and I helped, 150 people, organizations are not going to understand the scale and the scope of what you take on. Someone just reading that face value might think, okay, maybe it was a startup that he coached. Maybe it was $1 billion organization, or 5 billion or $20 billion organization with teams across multiple time zones, right? Different, right? From a credibility perspective, from a relatability perspective, especially if we're trying to attract those B2B contracts. We want to show that our experience is in alignment to their environment.
Yeah.
So a lot of us, when we tell our story, we take away some of that context. We leave out some of that detail, but that detail is important because that's what's going to help a leader recognize that, oh my God, he's familiar with our world. We need to bring him in. And then what I would do with this case study, you're really good at providing insight, Ryan. Like, you'll share the importance of basically diagnosing and all this stuff. But instead of doing that, you can do that at the end of your content or your posts. Before you do that, before you give people the how-to advice and the step-by-step, advice, I would go into the story, right? Go into the scenario. I would focus more on painting the before and after picture. So before you diagnosed, where was the company at? How were people feeling? Were they demotivated? Were they frustrated? What was their state? Right?
Yeah.
So what was their state? How were people
Yeah.
feeling?
Well, when I did the interview part and interviewing everyone, they would point at the other functions as the source of the issue.
Yeah.
So there was like a us versus them on multiple levels, whether it was, the issue is another function or if it's a leadership or management or whatever it might be. Yeah, so there was like a protective kind of energy to each function that I would interview, because I would deliberately interview functions kind of on their own, sometimes cross-functionally, but also on their own to understand that. Yeah.
And why were they pointing at each other?
They hadn't partly I think it's human nature.
Yeah.
But they had, and also because they just hadn't worked with a coach yet, ever.
Yeah.
So they'd had some good ways of working that they'd learned. But maybe I'm answering the question now.
There we go.
They hadn't worked with a coach who could actually show them that they could benefit from.
Well, often I find too that, I mean, you said this yourself, right? Is the reason, dysfunctionality happens at organizations is because the system is set up in a certain way that creates that dysfunctionality, you know? And you, as a coach, recognized those things about the system that needed to change, right? Because you're part of your brand, you call it systemic agility, right? It's about improving the system versus blaming people. We empower people by creating the right environments for them, by establishing the right systems so that we're not setting them up for failure. And so through your story, you want to show how you did that as a coach. Working with this massive organization, a part of it, 150 people, that's a large number. Teams of teams, right? And the story is that you notice that people were pointing fingers at each other. You can bring in some quotes to show that and bring it to life. Like you sat in a room and the product, team was pointing fingers at the UX team. I'm purposely saying this because I know there are people who are in that world, blaming each other, or blaming the developers or whatever. And then talk about why this was happening. How was that? How was their system set up in a way that was enabling that? And then how you, as a coach, were insightful to notice that. And then once you brought in those improvements to the system, then talk about what life was like after, how people were motivated. How can we show that success through tangible outcomes? Like, for example, when I started, we would never get through a meeting without people yelling at each other. But now everyone is just, collaborating. Um, they're trying to be part of the solution. They're feeling, others feel heard, whatever it is, right? And then you can close your story with a line that is insightful. This is where, at the end of the story, you can bring the insight and say, this is why it's important to diagnose the bottlenecks in a system. Oftentimes, organizations are not set up with the right structures to enable people to thrive, whatever the insight is, right? So there you go. That is an example of a LinkedIn post that you can share. And I just did that on the fly. And the way I work with people, right? Because part of how I work with people, I have different ways of working with people. Some people engage me more as a strategy basis, where, like you, the same way we did, I diagnose the bottlenecks in their brand, their messaging, why they're struggling with sharing their thought leadership, what's holding them back from it. We recognize for you that you might have been, providing too much insight in your post on its own without wrapping it with that scenario-based storytelling. And because of that missing context, organizations are unable to see how you could relate to their world. And there is that missing credibility aspect. This is why I often see a lot of people post content with a lot of how-to advice. And when I read it, I'm just wondering, well, what makes you an authority on this? Because I don't see the details. I don't see the success story. I don't see the tangible outcomes. I don't see the context. I don't even know if you did this yourself or not, right? So for you, that's some of what I've been able to diagnose, just to use your words. With others, I take it another step. Some founders engage me where we do that initially, but then we dive into some stories like we did with you. I ask them a lot of questions like I did, and we bring it to life to an actual post that they can actually put on LinkedIn that follows, the best practices that would hook people, stop the scroll, really see them as an authority, make them want to read, engage, and then share basically an end-to-end, funnel on how that can eventually turn into a client if we do that, and the content strategy behind it. But does that kind of make sense around what you feel you could do differently at this point?
Totally. Yeah. I think, you've kind of hit the nail on the head for some of the missing elements that I've had. So the one thing that stands out to me is some of the things that I know, they're so obvious to me that
Mhm.
I think that like either that it's kind of hard to explain how I work because it's just natural to me and it's obvious to me. So kind of speaking it out to you and having
Yeah.
you kind of help me to clarify the value that brings is super useful. But also that there's a formula that can be followed.
Exactly.
Not that that makes it like kind of copy paste
Yeah.
or super easy, but that you've been through this a lot, and so you can glean from that um, what makes for a good post. And I think that's one of the challenges that I've had, or almost kind of puts me into like um, a bind situation where I don't get started because I don't like there's too many options about which way a post could go. And then, as you say, my analytical mind ends up giving like a how-to solution, whereas kind of I like and can naturally tell stories, which I do in my trainings and stuff, but then
Exactly.
translating that into actually written form. So yeah, it's you provide a lot of hope.
There you go. And homework for you and everyone else on this call is start journaling your conversations, right? Any conversation you have with a client, with through your trainings, whatever. I'm sure that you record. Do you record any of your trainings?
Some, yeah. Hmm.
I would transcribe them honestly and rewatch them and pull content out of them. I often do that a lot with my clients where I'm actually doing the ghostwriting. He'll share with me, pieces of his trainings. I transcribe them. We pull all of the insight. We frame it into a content strategy that aligns with his brand. Wonderful. So I hope you all enjoyed this. I wanted to thank Ryan for being brave. It's not easy to actually be roasted, especially by me. If any of you are interested in getting more deeper level advice, it's very hard for me to go super deep in my LinkedIn posts because there's like a character limit. I think it's like 3,000. Um, B, it takes, multiple emails to kind of get those insights. So if any of you want, I am launching a newsletter where I provide that insight. Send me your DM me your email address, and I'm happy to add you to that list so that you can get more value, more storytelling frameworks, more awareness in terms of what you could be doing differently. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Ryan. It's been a pleasure as usual. And if any of you need help with writing your story, your origin story, also feel free to inquire and let me know. I'm taking on a couple of clients one-on-one because my schedule is pretty packed. But if it's not now, it could be in the future. Either way, getting on my newsletter is the best way to stay informed of my events, insights, and even future offers. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Nada. It was great.